Well, good evening, everybody. It's a couple minutes after 7, and so I think we're going to get started. The event is going to be live streamed, and you'll get more information from our moderator about deportment and all that throughout the event. But it goes much better if we can keep the chit-chat to a minimum while the recording is active. My name's Marty Carlson. I'm wearing a few different hats here this evening. I'm the exalted vice chair of the Kenwood Neighborhood Organization, one of the sponsors. It's a title that's every bit as exciting as it sounds. I'm a regular contributing writer for Hill and Lake Press, who's also another sponsor. But most pertinently, I'm president of the church council here at Lake of the Isles Lutheran Church. And wearing that hat in particular, I want to extend a very warm, secular, and nonpartisan welcome to all of you. Whoever you are and wherever you're from, I hope you feel very welcome here this evening. You are. I want to make a couple things clear. I think they're already clear from the materials, but none of the sponsoring organizations endorse any of the candidates you're going to hear from this evening. That's not why we're here. The church does not endorse candidates. The church does not get involved in politics. The only thing that we do endorse is voting. That's a good thing. Having an informed electorate is a good thing. Being an active member of your civic community is a good thing. We endorse that. But this event is for all of you to hear from the candidates directly. And then when the time comes to step up to the ballot box, make up your own mind, and hopefully you'll feel informed enough to make an informed choice that feels good to you. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, who is Whitney Larson. And if any of you have any questions during the event, I'll be standing in the back room there, which in church speak is called the narthex. And if you have questions, just feel free to flag me down or any of the other volunteers by the entrances. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good evening, and welcome to the Minnesota House District 61A Primary Candidate Forum. As he shared, my name is Whitney Larson. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, but not a resident of District 61A. I'm pleased to be moderating this forum tonight. The League of Women Voters is a volunteer organization with a long history of providing unbiased candidate and issue information that is widely used by voters, regardless of political belief. This forum is co-sponsored by IATA Leads, Bryn Mawr Neighborhood Association, Downtown Minneapolis Neighborhood Association, East Isles Neighborhood Association, Hill and Lake Press, Kenwood Neighborhood Organization, Lowry Hills Neighborhood Association, and the League of Women Voters Minneapolis. The views expressed are those of the candidates and not those of the co-sponsors. Neither the League of Women Voters nor its co-sponsors endorse candidates or political parties. We are holding this forum for voters to hear from the candidates and to compare their ideas. This forum is being held in front of a live audience at the Lake of the Isles Lutheran Church and is being live streamed to the League of Minneapolis website, lwvmpls.org. where a recording will be available in its entirety after the forum. Thank you to Joseph Lemire and the Lake of the Isles Lutheran Church for the production and recording of this event. We ask that campaign buttons or campaign t-shirts not be worn in this room, and that no signs or literature be distributed during the event. Please remain as quiet as possible while the candidates are speaking so that everyone can hear the discussion, including those watching the video. Please hold your applause until the end of the forum so that candidates will have the maximum time to respond to your questions. Finally, please silence all electronic devices. District 61A, located in west central Minneapolis, is a Minnesota House of Representatives district that includes all or part of the neighborhoods of Harrison, downtown Minneapolis, Loring Park, Elliott Park, Bryn Mawr, Lowry Hill East, Kenwood, East Isles, and Cedar Dean Isles. 3 candidates are running in the August 13th primary for the DFL nomination for the general election in November. No other political party had multiple candidates for the Minnesota House District 61A seat, and thus no other candidates will appear on the August 13th primary ballot for 61A. All of the candidates who appear on the ballot were invited to the forum and are with us this evening. The three candidates joining us tonight are, in alphabetical order, Katie Jones, Isabel Rolfes, and Will Stansel. We thank the candidates in advance for engaging in a respectful and civil discourse. We have timekeepers sitting in the front row so that each candidate has the same amount of time to respond to questions. Following the opening statements, each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to answer each question and 1 minute to make a closing statement. The timekeeper will hold up a card when there are 30 seconds and 15 seconds left, and a stop card when the time is up. We ask that the candidate finish their sentence and stop at that point. We expect this forum to last about 1.25 to 1.5 hours. Questions from community members have been submitted in advance to the League of Women Voters. During the forum, we will take written questions from the audience, and a volunteer will gather the questions and hand them to our question facilitators, and then to myself, the moderator. We ask that the questions be clear and pertinent to the issues at hand and made in the form of a question, not a statement. Questions must be directed to all of our candidates. Questions that are hostile or of a personal nature will not be included. We will ask questions about the legislature in general and specific legislative issues that touch all of our lives. To get to as many topics as possible, we will limit the number of questions in each category. Also, we have received many important questions very late in the solicitation window, and we will receive more tonight. There's never enough time to ask all of the questions or address all of the categories. We tried to consolidate as many as possible as well. If your question was not asked, please contact the candidates after the forum. Questions are also saved for future forums, including the forum for this district, 61A, before the general election. And finally, all submitted questions are the property of the League of Women Voters, Minneapolis. All right, after all that, let's kick it off. So, for the candidates' opening statements, we ask that they address the question, why are you running for the Minnesota House of Representatives, District 61A office? And what are your qualifications? Sorry about that. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to respond to opening statements. It was determined by drawing numbers that the first candidate to speak will be Katie. The order will then rotate. Kate?
Well, hello, good evening. My name is Katie Jones. I come from a small town in rural Indiana from a family of small business owners, but I fell in love with Minnesota at an early age. Kind of some feedback there. I fell in love with Minnesota at an early age because of a summer language immersion camp up in Bemidji. It's where I met my husband, and over 10 years ago, we bought our house here in the Wedge. As soon as I got here, I got involved. I got involved in the neighborhood board, was board president, I led our first strategic plan, and then I got involved in a number of city, county, and state level committees because I care about people and the planet and showing up for this community. We're here tonight because current Representative Frank Hornstein is retiring after 22 years. He's led with compassion and collaboration. I've had the honor of working with him on drafting nation-leading climate and transportation laws. I'm excited to carry on his legacy, but bring some new energy and also the wonkiness of an engineer. I'm running because I want to build a more just, resilient, and thriving Minnesota with you. It starts with justice for a reason. We can't do any of this work without addressing racial injustice, making sure we're protecting our LGBTQ rights, and protecting our reproductive rights. I want to build a resilient Minnesota, one that can withstand tough challenges, and oh boy, have we seen a number of tough challenges these last couple of years. I'm hearing from folks about public safety, about the economic challenges in uptown and downtown, and the crisis within our public schools. I'm running because I believe that we can work together to fix these issues by putting on our problem-solving caps and working together. I'm running because I want to build a thriving Minnesota, one that invests in people and in our communities. I'm excited to be here with you tonight to answer your questions, and I hope to earn your support for the August 13th election.
Thank you. Will.
Hello, everyone. I'm Will Stansel. I'm a civil rights attorney at the University of Minnesota. I've lived over here in Lowry Hill for 15 years. I serve on the Lowry Hill board. I serve on a committee of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I've worked on every level of government in my career as an attorney. I've worked at city councils. I've worked at state agencies. I work with Congress. I've worked with the White House. But the reason I'm running, honestly, is because Minneapolis, especially in the last 5 years or so, has really gone through some changes. We've lost a ton of businesses on Hennepin, uptown and downtown. Property taxes are going up. Our tax base is shrinking. There's some public safety issues that I'm sure all of you have heard about or experienced. Our schools are struggling. We've lost 20% of our enrollment in 5 years, and there's a huge deficit in the school district. I've worked on these issues 10 years at the state level. I think there's a lot the state can do to help the city. I think we can bring resources in to restore businesses, to make streets feel safer, to restore our tax base, and to bring kids back to our schools. There's another reason I'm running. I, like a lot of you, I'm sure, am very concerned with the national political environment. I'm pretty scared, actually. I'm a civil rights attorney. Keeping people safe, protecting them is fundamental to who I am. If worse comes to worse in November, the state government becomes the last line of defense for a lot of groups of people. People of color, women, minorities, religious minorities, immigrants, voting rights, reproductive rights, civil rights are all on the line. So I'd like to be in the state house to serve as that last line of defense, to keep people safe, to protect my neighbors. Thank you all for being here. A lot of familiar faces. I'm really looking forward to an exciting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Isabel Rolfus, and I'm also running for 61A. I'm running because I've spent years working at the legislature to help make DFL priorities a reality. In my work as staff in education policy, to the chair of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, chair of the Climate Action Caucus, and now the House Majority Leader, I've worked within multiple processes and jurisdictions and seen work get done. I've spent the last 5 years working for our party in our most vulnerable DFL state seats to make sure that our state was safe and blue, make sure we flip the Senate and get the trifecta. The majority of the values of the DFL across the state do exist here in our district. Our district is statistically one of the most civically engaged in the state, which means we're going to have a lot of opinions. But despite all of those opinions, I know all of us want to build an equitable and safe Minnesota where everybody has a chance to succeed. We need to work with all levels of government to do that. We need an education system that works for everyone in it, teachers, staff, and students. We need to build infrastructure that not just mitigates climate change, but is resilient to the extreme weather that we're facing. We do that by working with our union friends who build this infrastructure to make sure that our goals aren't just aspirational, but doable. We need to make sure that we help our small businesses by helping them fill vacancies in uptown and downtown, not just to help the businesses, but to connect community and to bring foot traffic back. We need to make sure that we strengthen our gun control laws so that kids in schools feel safe, neighbors on streets feel safe, and our business storefronts remain safe. To tackle these issues, we have to uplift, protect, and make sure that all of our workers are dignified in our state because they are the ones that help us make strides. This election, the legislature, politics, and truly government is a system that wasn't invented to benefit people like me. Yet the last 5 years, I've been working on Team DFL to deliver results. I know how to effectively represent the people of 61A, and I'm running to finish what we didn't do last year at the Capitol. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we'll move to the questions from the live audience and those that were submitted in advance. Candidates will have up to 1.5 minutes to answer each of these questions. Our order is going to kind of bounce around, so no one has to follow the same person each time or go first or go last. So just know that. So for the first question, we will have Isabel answer this one first. Conflicts between local control and state control came up in several bills that did not find consensus last year. If elected, What criteria will you use to approach these conflicts?
Yeah, so there are a lot of issues that come at the state level that oftentimes feel as if we're stepping on local jurisdictions. It's typically my approach to not step in the way of local governments and to let them govern on their own. However, we often see times where local governments are a little bit hesitant to seeing change in their areas to protect the charm that they've always had, but in doing so, they make it hard for other populations to thrive in their communities. If we're talking about bills that will make our entire state more equitable, and sometimes these local jurisdictions aren't ready to make that change, those are the times where my morals and ethics tend to point me in opposite to what my knee-jerk reaction would be to a situation. Every situation is incredibly unique, so I would have to look at all of them one by one to find out when it is appropriate to preempt a local jurisdiction. I really believe that every level of government deserves a lot of respect, which is why I prefer to collaborate with them as opposed to stepping over them at the state level. And I also know that as long as we, as a state legislature, have open communication with all of our local jurisdictions, it will be much easier to approach these issues and find consensus instead of just having to deal with opposition at our local government levels.
Thank you. Next we'll have Will.
Yeah, so I think that obviously city preemption is, as you said, is a controversial topic. In general, I'm pretty opposed to having the state preempt local jurisdictions on most matters. I think experience shows that most instances of city preemption are done, frankly, by right-wing legislators and advance right-wing goals. They're done to institute minimum labor standards, to remove environmental protections, to remove local control of land use. And so I am generally fairly opposed to city preemption, local preemption. With that said, I think my experience has been that everyone's opposed to preemption until the special exception comes around. I think the thing that comes to mind right now is the Uber-Lyft law that passed last session. The city of Minneapolis was preempted. I think there was a lot of consensus that that was a beneficial law and that was needed. And so I would not adopt a blanket position against city preemption, but I think in general I would be predisposed to vote against it in most cases.
Thank you. Katie.
I think at a high level, government has a duty to represent our shared values. And so whether that comes at the local level or at the state level, we have to have discussions around it. By default, I think having conversations at the local level makes a lot of sense. We understand very locally what our local situation is and how to make decisions around it. However, when there are bigger systemic issues in play, when we can, for example, making sure that everyone has a home, making sure that we have equitable ways to get around our community, that we have safe air, clean water, all of those things, we need to make sure that those are rights that we all as Minnesotans have. And so if there are local decisions that are preventing individuals from having those rights, I think that is a time in which it makes sense for the state to play a role. Also being said, we need to, every layer of government has a role to play, and we need to be partnering between those layers of government. Each one has their own jurisdiction, and so it is very critical that we're having those conversations to make sure we're not overriding the will of individuals.
Thank you. Our next question. Where do you see funding coming from to support the 2024, I think this is supposed to be 2025, House and Senate legislative agenda for Minnesota? What, if anything, would you be willing to give up? Will, you will be first.
So I think that in general, my preference for funding, so I am a progressive at the end of the day, and I think that if we are funding useful and needed government services and programs, I'm willing to fund those with increased revenues. And my preference would be increased revenues in the form of income taxes, particularly on the very wealthy. I think that what we're seeing right now is the tax burden in the Minnesota and the Twin Cities region falls disproportionately on people in Minneapolis because of the high property taxes here in Minneapolis. So my overall preference would be to shift revenues to income taxes. I think that would fall I think that those would land heavily on people living with high incomes, particularly in some of the wealthier suburbs where they have very low property tax burdens at the moment. With that said, obviously, there's a lot of dimensions to raising revenues, and I'd be willing to talk to anyone about any plan they may have. So,
Thank you. Next, we'll have Katie.
Funding our government is pretty important. We all rely on services every day provided by government, from, again, clean water to the streets we drive on to the schools where our kids are educated. And so it's critical that we have sufficient funding to provide those critical services. We basically have a couple of options when it comes to funding. Sales tax, those are more regressive. Property taxes, as was mentioned, we in Minneapolis bear a high portion of those. And then there's income tax. Income tax is also more of a progressive tax. So I would similarly want to make sure that we are taxing those who have the most because they have the most to be able to provide, to invest in our state. I think that's the other thing we should think about when it comes to taxes, is that these are investments in our community. I truly believe we all love our neighbors. Maybe not, the person right next to the street, but there are people that we love in this community, and so we want to make sure that we are providing for them. And because if we all work together, we are all a better community for it.
Thank you. Isabel.
Thank you. Well, similarly to what others have said on the stage, I believe that when we talk about having more funding into our state government and raising revenue, we should make sure we're taking progressive routes at that, not regressive taxes as much as possible. We have a lot of disparities in our state, whether they be racial or any other identity, and we don't want to add more of those regressive taxes if we have the chance to make it progressive. In our state, we see a lot of our small and local business, family-owned businesses struggling, yet our largest corporations are seeing record numbers. I think that we need to restructure our tax system to be even more progressive when it comes to businesses so that small businesses and local businesses can get a break and the larger businesses pay their fair share. Our tax system and our tax structure is really how we show what we care about as a state and who we value. And by doing this is a really important way that we can raise revenue as well as making it easier for local and small businesses to succeed. I think that's incredibly important as we talk about not just the state holistically, but the state of our district right now. I think having successful small businesses will be an incredible way for us to feel connected to our community again. And by raising revenue from wealthier corporations and people and not as much from our businesses and their taxes, we won't only just be getting more revenue at the state level, but we'll be helping those that need it the most. And I believe that's how we will fund all of the things that we need to do to make sure everybody in our state can thrive.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to some questions on some pretty specific issues. This first one is around the Equal Rights Amendment. The bill creating a ballot initiative for an equal rights amendment failed to pass the 2024 legislative session. What are the lessons that can be learned from that, and what, if anything, would you do to support this initiative? First up this time, we'll have Katie.
Thank you for the question. This issue is near and dear to my heart because I believe every person deserves bodily autonomy. I am fiercely pro-choice, and I am fiercely for women's rights. Unfortunately, not everyone has experienced that even in our community. I met a woman in Bryn Mawr who actually underwent an illegal abortion in the 1960s. And she is terrified of the consequences of the recent Dobbs decision and that people will have to undergo similar experiences that she will. Luckily, here in Minnesota, we have statutes that are protecting us. But statutes can be changed at the turn of any legislature. And that is why it is so critical that we pass the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. It's why I attended the Women's March in DC in 2017. It's why I've been attending numbers of ERA Days at the Capitol over the last number of years, and the Planned Parenthood protests also over the last number of years. I think when it fundamentally comes down to it, this is a similar conversation as the one that we had in the Vote No campaign in 2012. This is about talking to individuals about being human. What is it like to be human and the rights that we deserve? Every person deserves to have dignity in our state, and the Equal Rights Amendment will help us get there. And so we need a similar campaign to what we did in 2012.
Thank you. Next, Isabel.
Thank you for the question. So as we know, the ERA only passed one body last year, so it did not become law, so we don't have it yet scheduled to be on our ballots. I think what we need to do to get that passed, as House Caucus members, we know we have the votes, and we need to pass that in the first month of session. We need to make it clear to the folks that have been campaigning for this since the 70s that we are appreciative of their work, and that we're going to pass this bill not just for them, but every other Minnesotan who falls in the categories that the ERA protects. Whether it be folks who are queer, whether they be BIPOC, whether they are any of these identities, the ERA protects them because over time we've created an inclusive ERA. This took a lot of work to get us to where we are now, to write a bill, to write the language that works to protect everyone. And to make sure that we do that, we have to push our entire caucus. We need to work with community and organizers to make sure that it's a priority right when session starts next year. This is actually the first issue that got me really involved in politics. I learned about second wave feminism and shortly after about intersectionality. And this ERA completely encompasses that. As a state, this has to get passed so that we are constitutionally protected. As a pro-choice endorsed candidate, I don't take these issues lightly. As a queer woman of color, I don't take these issues lightly. This needs to get passed as soon as we get back into session.
Thank you. And Will?
I agree. This is obviously very important. As a civil rights attorney, I've seen how important it is to encode civil rights protections into law, into statute, into the Constitution. There's just no substitute for that. If once you do, it's much, much harder for the people who want to infringe upon rights, to harm groups, to harm vulnerable groups, to come after them. So this is absolutely a high priority. I think that especially with some of the national political problems that we've seen, that the momentum is there to install new protections in statute in the Constitution. And if I were elected, just like I assume both the other candidates, I would be fully supportive of doing this on day one or whatever day it takes. So 100% supportive, and would push as hard as I can to pass the ERA.
Thank you. That was an easy one. All right, now we'll move on to some questions that were submitted around the economy. First, there have been several high-profile accusations of fraud and waste in Minnesota programs that distribute resources to vulnerable populations. What would you do, if anything, to ensure better accountability and oversight? First up for this question, we'll have Will.
So this is really important to me. It's actually even on my website. I think that government accountability is vital. I believe this in part because I am a progressive and I do believe in the ability of government to get things done. But I don't think taxpayers, I don't think constituents will trust us if we're careless with their money, careless with their resources, if we let it go to organizations or institutions that are going to waste or steal it or abuse it. So I think that first off, we need to be attach greater oversight to money that is being spent by the government on organizations, third-party organizations, nonprofits, organizations that may have a current weak oversight or poor visibility into their activities. Second, I think the legislature has a lot of powers, a lot of authorities to investigate misuse of funds. I think that you have legislative subpoenas, legislative committees, and I think that these tools should be used to investigate and examine instances where funds have been wasted. I think this is a really vital component of restoring trust in government, and I think it's really vital in order to pursue some of the larger goals that I think are important to this district.
Thank you. Next, Isabel.
Can you just ask the question again?
I absolutely can.
Thank you.
Let me just find the sheet that it was on. There have been several high-profile accusations of fraud and waste in Minnesota programs that distribute resources to vulnerable populations. What would you do, if anything, to ensure better accountability and oversight?
Thank you. So as we know, there have been issues of fraud that have come up that have made news, but since we started learning about those, the DFL legislature already started making strides towards making more of our grants competitive so that we didn't see as much of this fraud. What we also have to do is really do a lot more government oversight with our grants. But I do think we need to be careful with when we're talking about competitive grants, because these nonprofits that need our help the most often serve our most at-need friends. And these nonprofits don't always have a ton of resources, and to get competitive grants and to keep up with all of that paperwork requires a lot, and not every nonprofit has that. And by making sure that we have competitive grants, we need to find a way to make sure that we provide resources to our smaller nonprofits to be able to still do the grants and have all the resources to make sure that they're getting their check-ins and make sure that they get held accountable. I really do believe that nonprofits have a really special place for us. They help out when government is stretched thin, they advocate for really important issues, and they are probably the number one entity that's helping us with housing and homelessness. So we can't just shed them all as evil. We know that people have misused these funds, which is why we've started making steps already. If elected, I want to build off of those steps to make sure we have even more oversight and ensure that our groups who are full of marginalized communities and do that really important work have the aid from the government they need to show us and become accountable and really give all the reporting they need without stretching them too thin.
Thank you. Katie.
Trust in government is so critical for our democracy. And every instance of fraud damages that. We cannot have that happen. We talked earlier about taxes and raising revenue and how these are investments in our community. We have to be able to trust that those dollars are actually going to bring those services that we rely on. We have 3 branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. The legislative branch has a responsibility to hold the executive accountable. So it's nice that we are of the same party. We can maybe play a little nicer, but we need to daylight when things are not going right, even within our own party. And that's why at the legislature, we have a role to call for public hearings, to daylight information, to make sure that this information is clear to all public stakeholders so that people can be held accountable. It's a risk to the DFL if we don't get this fraud under control. And so that's why it's important that folks like us are up there making sure that we are working together to daylight those items.
Thank you. Our next question: how do you propose to increase the availability and access to affordable housing, especially for renters, the unhoused, and first-time homebuyers? First up for this question, we'll have Isabel.
Thank you. So as we know, we're in a housing crisis, and there are a lot of things that we can do to address that. First, if I'm elected, I want to make sure we pass the conversion tax credit for office spaces to be turned into residential spaces in downtown. That's incredibly important. But housing is so much more than just apartments. It's also a young person buying their first home. Expanding on the homeowner assistance program for first-time buyers is incredibly important as well. When we talk about our friends on the streets who are homeless and need help, we need to collaborate with our social services and our county to make sure that the legislature is doing whatever they can to make it so the county can bring out those services that they need to make sure folks have the help that they need. We need to make sure that we're making our benefits and wages good for our outreach directors out in the streets so our friends who are homeless have people talking to them and providing them with resources. When we talk about the spectrum of housing, whether it be unhoused or in a home, there are a lot of things that we need to face, and we need to start ground up and talk about all the different types of housings that exist. Again, it's not just apartments, it's not just houses, it's also the services that we provide to get people in a position to be in those homes so that they can be safe and build a life for themselves that they're proud of.
Thank you. Next, Katie.
Everyone in our community deserves a safe and stable home. Full stop. And that means we need to build more housing, we need abundant housing in our state, and we need diverse housing types for the different types of families folks have, the lifestyles people have, and the stages of life in our community. We have an aging population in Minnesota to care for, and so we need options for multi-generational living. From the ability to build more senior homes. You know, I've been talking to folks at the Kenwood Isles condos, and they were raving about how affordable those homes are and how dignified they are for their stage of life. We need to be building flexible living opportunities, such as building accessory dwelling units behind someone's house. So that if some, you know, I've been talking with my husband about, well, what if our parents at some point need to live with us? And we actually have a triplex, so they could live on the first floor. So those types of arrangements allow us to care for our family members. And we know that assisted living and all of these other things, they cost a lot of money. If we can have more flexibility in our buildings, the better that we can care for in our families. Right before I jumped into this race, I was part of a coalition of housing, labor, and a number of other groups pushing to make it so we can build more housing in this state. And I'll continue to fight for that in the legislature.
Thank you. Will.
So I've worked for about a decade on affordable housing issues. And what I can tell you is the affordable housing system in Minnesota is basically broken. We spend massive amounts of money to build units. I've found units that were $800,000 for a single bedroom unit. We build units in areas that don't have access to good jobs, to access to good schools. My preferred approach to fixing our affordable housing system, to providing affordable units, providing housing for folks, is to restore the system we had before. In the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, we had a really effective regional system for providing affordable housing. It required governments, suburban governments, to guide land for their fair share of moderate and low-income housing. It worked. Cities did this. There was a lot of housing that was produced. Most of it was produced in suburbs that today are exclusionary, that are not building a lot of affordable housing. This system was abandoned, effectively abandoned in the 1990s for a variety of reasons. I'd like to put it back in place. I think that that's the easiest way to build thousands of new units to ensure that there's sufficient housing supply in Minnesota to meet demand and to ensure that everyone has a place to stay regardless of income.
Thank you. Next up, we have a question on climate. How would you support Minnesota's continued efforts to work toward climate change solutions? And what specific next steps would you advocate for? And we're back to the original order. Katie.
So climate change is the biggest problem humanity has ever faced. No one can escape it, as much as we might try. One of my volunteers, actually, she moved here from Arizona to escape the heat and the dwindling water supply, but then was met with smoky air coming in from Canada. This is something that's going to affect all of us. And that is why, up to this point, I have dedicated my career to working in climate. From working in buildings and energy, where I've passed laws in seven different cities and 3 at the state, because we have to tackle this problem. I've also been addressing this issue in waste, because that also creates carbon emissions, and land use and transportation. There is no sector that does not, almost zero sector that does not provide greenhouse gas emissions. And so as an engineer, I've actually done greenhouse gas inventories for the city of Minneapolis. I know the sources of our pollution. And so I'm going to be working to implement the 100% clean electricity law, because there are still issues that we need to tackle. I want to make sure that we're tackling our thermal energy networks. So not just electricity, but we are all using a lot of natural gas, and that provides a lot of emissions. We also need to decarbonize our transportation sector. We need to decarbonize our homes. Now I have to stop, but thank you so much for this question.
Thank you. Will.
Original order, it's me.
Yep, you're on. Sorry.
Yeah, so Minnesota has some really great climate goals now passed by the DFL. We have a net zero by 2050 goal. What worries me a little is that this is a goal, it's not a plan. And so I think that we need a plan. We need a roadmap. There are a lot of technical hurdles left, frankly, to reaching net zero. We need a plan that tells us where they are, what policies need to be implemented, and at what time frame to reach these goals. The problem here is we have made a lot of progress towards decarbonizing the energy grid. That's where we've made the most progress, I think, is power generation. Even there are major technical hurdles remaining. I think we need to invest in getting past those obstacles. There are also, of course, other parts of the economy that are producing a lot of emissions: agriculture, industry, construction. We need to find ways to decarbonize those industries as well. We're much further behind, and that's where we especially need a plan. We need to know what hurdles are in front of us. The other thing I'd say is that for a lot of people, climate change is already here. There are already severe weather events, rainstorms, heat waves. And so in addition to providing a roadmap to cutting emissions, we need to provide weatherization strategies to help people in Minneapolis and in Minnesota survive our new climate. Climate change, unfortunately, is going to keep happening for a time, and we need to make sure that people are able to weather these severe weather events when they come.
Thank you. Isabel.
Thanks. As we talk about climate change, we've heard on the stage that we've set a lot of ambitious goals in Minnesota, clean energy by 2040, but as we're getting there now, we've talked about implementation of that. We're going to tackle climate change by making sure that we have pathways for laborers to build this infrastructure. We're going to get 100% clean energy by finally inviting BIPOC and low-income people to the table when we're talking about climate change, folks who have actually been affected by the pollution that's happening from industrialization. And we need to make sure that we can't just have the same groups always making these climate decisions. We need to bring in new voices that have really important things to say that have always been left out of the discussion. We need to make sure our state's weatherized. After this really wet, rainy summer, we have a lot of things that are going to need to get fixed. We're going to drain our emergency disaster fund at the state to pay for everything. So we need to make sure that we invest in all of this infrastructure ahead of time to make sure it's weatherized, because it's a lot more expensive to have to refix something than to invest in it to make sure that it's going to be resilient in the first place. We have to leverage federal funds with the IRA. Minnesota is a net donor to the federal government, so we should be getting some of that money back to pay for electrification in our state. We need to talk about sustainable agriculture practices for our small farmers and our family-sized farmers, and eventually the large-sized farmers too. And lastly, I think as we talk about climate change, we need to talk about the power that each of us have. Individual homeowners have a chance to make their homes energy efficient, and we need to create pathways for renters to have a say in how clean their homes are as well. Because if energy efficiency is low, renters pay a lot for utilities.
Thank you. Our next question is one that was submitted around transportation. What, if anything, would you do to continue building a transportation system that is accessible and safe for users of all abilities and incomes in Minneapolis and throughout the state? Isabel, you are first.
Thanks for the question. So if we're talking statewide for transportation, we need to make sure that our roadways are safe and that we have the people that are there to clear them off if there are storms. There's a lot of times when people can't use their roads because it's not being kept to. That's really important when we're talking statewide. When we're talking 61A specific, transportation has a lot of different faces here. Whether you're a walker, a biker, a driver, or you take transit, we have to be safe in all of these avenues. We need to make sure that our roads are set up safely for pedestrians. Like on Lindale Avenue with those new pedestrian crosswalks, we've seen crashes go down and deaths go down. We need to talk about that more to make sure that pedestrians have rights and that they're safe from drivers. We need to make sure that we're bolstering on our programs to make transit safe. We need to make sure that we have those transit safety officers. And by doing that, I will work with the Vice Chair of Transportation, Brad Tabke, as he's been doing this work for years. And it's a very big priority of his to make sure that transit is safe for everyone. And also, I know there's a big concern with folks that are perhaps needing a little bit of help when they're at transit stops and making others feel unsafe. This again means we have to make sure we have good funding and benefits for folks who do outreach on the streets for our unhoused friends and our friends who are struggling. That job is wildly important because it's not just empathy, but it's also incredibly emotionally and mentally draining. Those folks need that pay and those benefits so that they can make sure our friends on the streets are safe and that folks taking transit don't feel uncomfortable either.
Thank you. Will, you are next.
So I am a strong supporter of transit. I would support greater investment in transit and safer transit. As Isabel said, I think that there have been some issues in that regard in the last few years. I think that in this district, though, a key transit question has been the Southwest Light Rail. Obviously, this project has not gone entirely according to plan. I think there's been major budget overruns. I know that there have had to be some design changes in the recent months. Right now, we have a severe problem. Our transit planning is managed in part by the Met Council. I think that in order to have more effective transit planning in the Twin Cities area, the Met Council probably needs to be reformed in some way. There was an effort to do this in the last legislative session. I know it resulted in a number of different proposals for a more accountable Met Council, including reforming the transit component of the body. And I would be very supportive of finding finding a way to create a more accountable Met Council in order to facilitate better transit planning in the region.
Thank you. Katie.
We all deserve safe and reliable ways to get around. And as I've been talking with folks, I've been hearing some concerns. A woman in Lowry Hill, she wants to make sure she can drive to Kowalski's when she needs to get her groceries. I heard from a couple who moved here from Iowa at the caucuses, and they were saying they wanted to be able to walk in our neighborhoods. And then I met Bryce. He moves around in a wheelchair. He would use Metro Mobility, except for the fact that there's a 2-hour window when that service is supposed to arrive. Can you imagine it taking 2 hours just for your ride to arrive? That's not acceptable. And so that's why he likes to use our regular Metro transit system. And that's why we must continue to invest in that system. This district has been a leader on transportation for many, many years. And as the hub of the transit system, especially in downtown, this district has to continue that leadership. Something that is on my mind is also the sustainability of our transportation system. We in Minnesota have the 4th highest number of lane miles in the country, although we are 12th in size and I think 23rd in population. That's a lot of road to maintain. And so we have to be smart about our policy and how we build our cities and how we invest in our whole transportation system so that we are optimizing it for our communities.
Thank you. Our next question pertains to education. What should be the legislature's role, if any, in determining school curriculum, funding, and policy in public schools? First up for this one, we'll have Will.
So the final responsibility for public education falls to the legislature. This is something I've worked on for a long time. It's actually in the Minnesota Constitution. It says, the Republican system of government, depending chiefly upon the intelligence of the people, is the duty of the legislature to create a general and uniform system of public schools. And so ultimately, whether or not the schools in Minnesota are meeting standards, whether they're adequate, is up to the legislature. With that said, I think that primarily the main policy tool the legislature has is providing funding and supporting good teachers, setting standards. I don't think the legislature should be greatly involved in setting curriculum. I think that we have an opportunity to build a very strong public education system by supporting well-funded schools and programs that attract parents to public school districts.
Thank you. Katie.
So every student in our state deserves to have a high-quality education. And we should have uniform standards decided at the state level. And like Will, I don't think it makes sense to have about more than 100 legislators dictating those specific standards. And that should be handled by the executive. But there are a few things that I think it is upon the legislature to make sure that we're protecting. Not too long ago in St. Louis Park, there were parents who objected to LGBTQ books being a part of the curriculum based on religious grounds. And given our current laws, the school board said that the students had to agree with the parents and said that the students didn't have to read them. It is a conflict in some ways between around religious rights as well as LGBTQ rights. But I think denying the existence of a whole group of people, there's something fundamentally wrong about that. And so I think that we should be looking at those laws and changing them so that we recognize the full worth and dignity of LGBTQ people in our community. Beyond that, the legislature does have a role for setting funding, and MPS is hurting over $100 million of a deficit. So I am committed to finding ways to make Minneapolis public schools whole.
Thank you. Isabel.
Thank you for the question. So as we talk about the state's role in curriculum funding and policy, the state did just pass a health standards ed thing, so that now for public schools, there will be a standard put together by the executive to be blanket for the state for what kids are being taught essentially in sex ed class. That's incredibly important because as we've seen in small jurisdiction, this is going unmet and this need is incredibly important for students. We know that certain types of health training doesn't actually give the results that people want to think it does. Kids need to know what is going to happen to their bodies and just about their future. And if we do abstinence only, that will not help anybody. When we talk about funding, the state has a phenomenal role when it comes to funding funding education. Whether it be doing general funding, which we did last session as well, it comes to specific issue areas too. We can talk about how we need to pay our teachers more. The better our teachers are treated, the better our students will be treated, because the teachers will have more time and bandwidth. We need to fill our cross subsidies in our state, whether it be the special education cross subsidy or the English language learner. If I had to pick something to do, I think we absolutely need to fill that English learner subsidy. In Minneapolis, we have a diverse school district, and this disproportionately will actually benefit us if the state fills it and it's less burden on the district. And when it comes to policy, whether it be book bans, like a ban on book bans, like we passed last legislative session, or more, we have to find these by talking to teachers and people that are on the ground doing the work, not folks at the Capitol guessing what schools need, but talking to folks we know.
Thank you. Next, we have a question that was submitted around public safety. What role does the state legislature play in the oversight and support of our city and county law enforcement agencies? And what, if anything, do you think needs to change? And why or why not? First up for this question is Katie.
Thank you for the question. We have to start by recognizing that everyone deserves to be safe in our community, to feel safe and to be safe. And too many folks that I've been talking to have experienced, carjackings or muggings, and that's just not right in our community. Addressing public safety is a multi-jurisdictional issue, as has been mentioned. The state can play a number of roles. First, in making sure that our public safety system is fully funded. Minneapolis is projected to have a $20 million budget deficit. We need to fund our city, resource our city, and actually 20 years ago, local government aid, the funding from the state to the city, was cut for Minneapolis. It's time to restore that. It's time to bring focus back to Minneapolis, because when Minneapolis thrives, the whole state thrives. Beyond funding, we also need to look at the structural laws around accountability. We are lucky enough to have in our community members who have served on the post board. And these folks have been bringing up great ideas around accountability. When someone provides a complaint to the police, ensuring that there is a feedback mechanism, because that's how we build trust back into our community. At the end of the day, we all deserve to feel safe, and I'm going to be working creatively to make sure we can.
Thank you. Next up, Isabel.
Thank you for the question. The state has a lot of things it can do to help Minneapolis when we talk about public safety. Last year, we sent $30 million to the city, and I'm wanting to do that again. I think that when we talk about our District 2 and public safety, there's no secret that people have different opinions. So, as an elected official for all of those people, I want to value everybody's opinions on public safety, which means I want to send funding to the city of Minneapolis for their public safety services. But I also want to work with the post board, the Police Officer Standards Training Board, to work on their training processes to make sure that folks are safe on the streets, whether they're an officer or they're somebody calling for an officer. To be a representative of an area is to hear every opinion, hear every perspective, and to do action on all of it to serve everyone. That's what our district needs in a leader for public safety. When we talk about specific things, I want to make sure that we see some more uptown safety programs. I know through the council level they passed Uptown Safety Ambassador program, but it's yet to be implemented. This is the same thing that's happening with downtown with their program, and if this fails to get the funding or to pass and be implemented at the city level, I want to send that money to the city so that they can implement that program. That won't fix our problem, but it will make a very big difference to start as we take big overhauls, as what we're talking about public safety and funding and changes. We need to do these little things as well as the big things. We can't just do one or the other. It takes a lot of steps to fix something this big. And I believe as well we have to talk about recidivism rates and how we treat our incarcerated folks for when they come back from being incarcerated, entering society again. That's to allow programs in the prisons, and that's my time. Thank you.
Thanks. Will.
When I knock on doors in this district, I hear about public safety a lot, as you'd imagine. One of the most striking conversations I've had in this entire campaign was with an advocate for police reform, and he said, my vision is a system where a child can graduate from a Minneapolis high school and be proud to work at the Minneapolis Police Department. And this is a person who'd advocated substantially for police reform. So I know this is a contentious issue, but what I've really discovered, I think, is that there's actually a lot of consensus about what we want from this. Everyone wants responsive to the police department. Everyone wants law enforcement officers that show up when you call because they're sufficiently staffed, they're sufficiently resourced. everyone acknowledges after the last few years there's need for reform. So, and of course everyone acknowledges it's unacceptable to have to deal with or worry about carjackings or gun robberies in your neighborhood, in your backyard. So I think the state has a lot it can do to support these things. You can provide funding for particular purposes. I think that the funding for investigative resources to make sure that people who commit crime are caught, resources for victim response to ensure that if you're the victim of a crime, that you have a response, you are able to access the resources you need, and resources to help change the cultural issues around police departments that are preventing us from hiring sufficient officers that are making conflicts with the community so common.
Thank you. Next, we have another related public safety question that was submitted. Many are concerned with increased gun violence in our communities. What legislation or specific ideas do you have to respond to citizens' needs for safer communities? First up for this one, we'll have Will.
So I'm going to say, I got in a little trouble for this. I'm going to say that I am totally opposed to pretty much any form of gun ownership in the city. I think that, you know, if I'm elected, I'd be supportive of any effort within the bounds of constitutional law to limit or regulate the purchase of handguns and other firearms. I think that so many of the problems we've seen revolve around easy access to guns, and I think that to the extent that we can remove guns and weapons from our streets, many of the public safety issues will dramatically improve. I got a questionnaire from the NRA, and they gave me, I think, an F-. So that is that to me is a high priority. It would make everything feel a lot safer if you didn't have to worry about someone walking down the street carrying a weapon.
Thank you. Isabel.
Thank you for the question. So if I'm elected, what I would do if I would go to the legislature, there already is a bill that's in the making that was last year at the legislative session, which was for a ban on automatic rifles. Representative Finke carried that bill. I would sign on to that bill and be supportive of it. I also would like to see our safe storage bill pass the finish line. And interestingly, piggybacking off of NRA, safe storage is even something that NRA condones that we do. We need to make sure that our guns are safely stored in our homes if people have them. Also, as we talk about gun violence, we can't forget how we talk about these issues and don't ever talk about the people that are most affected. We need to make sure we're talking with survivors of domestic abuse when we're talking about gun violence, as they're likely to be folks that have dealt with it before and can have really good insight. And just making sure we're being empathetic to the folks who may also be seeing this in the future. Not just survivors currently, but this could happen to more folks. And as we do more prevention for gun violence, it makes everybody safer, whether it just be your neighbors on the street, a business storefront, or somebody in a really dangerous situation. So any and all legislation that comes my way that's to prevent gun violence, you can trust me to sign on to that bill and vote yes.
Thank you. Katie.
Yeah, guns are a threat in our community, and there are simply too many of them, as has basically been said before. I think there are a number of things that we can do. First is banning automatic weapons. There's no reason that we need those here in Minnesota. Second, safe storage laws also make a lot of sense. I've lived in countries in Europe where they have safe storage laws, and they help. And I think another thing is to delay access. So, you know, we in other states, they create lots of barriers for women having reproductive health access. We can do the same thing when it comes to guns, because those are actually life-threatening. And last, but almost most importantly, is building back trust within our communities. I think in the last couple of decades, the buying spree of guns has been because we are trusting one another less. There is more division within the city, between cities and rural areas, and the more that we see one another as humans, the more that we can trust to be safe with one another, the less that people are going to turn to buying guns. And I'll end with that.
Thank you. We're going to circle back to another question that was submitted around the economy. What will you do to support local businesses and neighborhoods like those in this district to thrive? The first up for this one is Isabel.
Thank you for the question. So our local businesses, as we all know, are struggling right now. What I would do is make sure that the promise grants are implemented well and our businesses can receive them. I also would make sure that going forward, any transit projects that happen in construction are tied to anti-displacement funding. Anti-displacement funding is exactly what it sounds like. It's funding for the businesses along the corridors that are dealing with construction. And then after it's done, also making sure that the businesses and the folks that live along those corridors don't see spikes in their prices and get priced away. The last thing we want to do is see what happened on University Avenue, where gentrification came with the light rail, and the people that needed transit most were no longer able to access housing close to it. We need to pass that anti-displacement funding also because it chiefly supports our small businesses. As we talk about transit as well, we should be having advertisements on our transit stations, on our buses, to let you know when you're getting off at a stop what local businesses you can visit. I think that we need to start creating partnerships between different jurisdictions instead of always pitting them against each other. I believe in a world where small businesses and transit companies and Metro Transit see each other as friends and not enemies, and transportation being expanded and transit options and more public transit being expanded actually helps our small businesses. This requires collaboration and making sure we can bring people together that historically aren't usually on the same team. And that's what this campaign is about. And this is what our district is about, bringing together different people who all have the same outcome goals. We want to see our communities survive, we want to see our communities connected, and we want to see all of us getting along and being united as we're moving forward in a place where everyone can succeed.
Thank you. Katie?
We've all been sitting here for more than an hour, so if you want to like wiggle a little bit or just like, you know, I know it's been a long time, so I'm just giving myself permission to move about a little bit so we don't all fall asleep. Anyway, so businesses are critical to our community, and they make our district in particular special. I want to expand those opportunities and grow our tax base, and that will help stabilize our property taxes. We need to focus on downtown and uptown, because they're both hurting. Downtown, after COVID, you know, things have changed. The office 9-to-5 culture is not going to be the same. We don't need a fix for the 9-to-5, we need a 24/7 solution. A thriving downtown has people. And as I've been talking with members of the Downtown Council, they are really excited about adaptive reuse, you know, conversions of office to residential. And I work in buildings. I know that can't happen everywhere. However, where it can happen, we're bringing more customers, and that's a better customer base. So when we have a customer base, that attracts new businesses. Let's move to Uptown. So Uptown is really struggling right now. Actually, the day that I decided to run, I was so excited because I was like, I can do something about it. Just like on University, when we put in the green line, the state invested small business grants. I want to continue that and bake that into the municipal state aid that we use for every single commercial project in the state.
Thank you. Will?
So when I started running for the seat, one of my very top priorities was revitalizing Uptown, revitalizing our business districts. It's why so many people live here. It's really important to me. I am not, however, a business owner, so I wasn't sure what the best way to do this was. I decided I could walk down Hennepin, walk down Lyndale, and just actually ask the businesses what they needed, what their obstacles were. It didn't take very long because there's not many left. I heard 4 things over and over. Road construction. They need support during construction. Second, parking. If there's going to be street changes to take away parking, you need to find a way to ensure the customers can get to the businesses that feel safe or still safe coming here from out of state. Solutions for that. Third, grants. There are grants available, but they are not always accessible to businesses. There are standards on them. There are minimum requirements. There's money up front. Changing the grant program so the businesses can access them. And then fourth, public safety. Over and over, I heard business owners tell me that they lost customers, not necessarily because things were unsafe, because they felt unsafe. And so these 4 things, to me, were overwhelmingly the critical elements of restoring our business districts. Now, there's not a magic solution to all 4 of them, to restoring Uptown, restoring downtown, but I think that addressing these problems, finding solutions for these problems, is how you get our business districts back.
Thank you. So as one of the candidates already mentioned, we've been sitting here for a while. So sometimes when this happens, I like to switch up the structure a tiny bit. We're going to do what is called a lightning round question. So basically, I'm just going to ask the question, and you get to say yes or no. And that's all you get to say. So, and then after that, we have a few more questions about you as candidates, and we'll do closing statements. All right. So for the lightning round question, I guess, yeah, I'm just going to reword this so it can be yes or no. Um, ranked choice voting. Do you support expanding this to be statewide? Yes or no? And we'll start with Katie and go down the line.
Yes.
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 That was easy. All right, thank you. Okay, so now moving into a few questions about you as candidates. If elected, what will be your top 3 priorities and why? And we'll go back to the original order again, since that was a lightning round. So Katie, you are up.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, what I'm hearing most from our community is concerns about safety, about the economy, so the economic situations in downtown and uptown, and our public schools. And so as a member of the House of Representatives, I want to represent you and the issues that are on top of your minds. Actually, for those of you who I've gotten to speak with on the door, and I've door knocked almost 5,000 doors personally, that is the question that I ask. What is the state issue, what are the state issues on top of your mind? And so those are the 3 that I'm going to be addressing most fervently at the Capitol.
Thank you. Will?
So I had 3 issues that were the top for me at the very start of this campaign. They were my first pieces of literature. They're going to be my last piece of literature. One is revitalizing Minneapolis, bringing back our businesses, bringing back our tax base. Second is protecting our public schools, making sure the Minneapolis school district is growing and not shrinking, making it schools that parents want to bring their kids back to again. And then the third is protecting the civil rights of Minnesotans, particularly as we move into this troubled and frightening period in American history.
Thank you. Isabel?
The top 3 issues that I want to lead on if elected to the State House would be issues surrounding education, labor, and safety, because these are things we're hearing from our district. Education is hugely important. As you all know, MPS is struggling, and I want to find solutions at the state level to help. That's not just funding directly to the schools, but also to the teachers and to the support staff. As a daughter of a paraprofessional in schools, I know how important it also is to make sure we have mental health resources in schools. I've seen my mom come home from schools on days where I can tell she's carrying the burden and emotions of a lot of students who aren't getting the help they need. Labor is incredibly important. To get anywhere as a society, we need to have workers who are dignified and treated well and recognized for all of the work they do to help us move us forward. I will never stand down from backing labor. And lastly, safety. Safety goes into so many different areas, whether it be safety for our kids in school from gun violence, safety to our queer friends in the state, safety for our neighbors on the streets from violence, and of course, safety for our storefronts. Having met with over 20 of our businesses and emailing hundreds more, I've heard from every single one of them that safety is their top concern, whether it be safety for their business or just for their neighbors. So these are the issues that I plan to lead on, and I plan to lead on them to make deliveries directly to our district so we can see tangible changes within the first biennium.
Thank you. Our next question is, please describe your approach to working through a contentious issue and coming to an agreement. What specific skills would you use to do this? First up for this one is Isabel.
Yeah, so when it comes to working through contentious issues, whether it be with colleagues at the legislature or with constituents on the door, the number one thing you have to do is be honest. You can't lie about your positions to people and expect that they won't find it out later. All that does is break your trust. You need to make sure you're building strong relationships with folks, even if you're not on the same page as them on an issue. That's how you find collaboration. If you tell somebody, or if you don't want to make a trusted relationship with somebody and then you need to compromise with them later, odds are the compromise won't be that much fun to do because you guys will not be seeing eye to eye. My style of governance will be incredibly accessible, incredibly open, and really to let anyone who has something to say come to my table. As someone who's from rural Minnesota and has held the identities as a queer and BIPOC person, I certainly know how it feels to be left out. So the best way to get through these contentious issues is to keep your door open, to keep seats at your table open to folks, and have honest conversations as you move through them together and find the compromises to make everybody's lives better.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Will.
So I think that I have a good idea of how not to work through a contentious issue, which is that I think that the approach we've adopted in Minneapolis in recent years has been highly factional. And I've heard a lot about this when I talk to voters, that people are tired of arguing about very difficult, very complicated issues and feeling like they had to join a team. That's not going to work in the legislature. In order to pass any law, you need 68 votes. That means you're going to have to work with people you don't agree with. You're going to have to talk to people that you may not see eye to eye with on a lot of issues. So my view is that we should move back to an older style of politics, one centered around conversation, talking about our fundamental interests, talking about what we want to get done. Being willing to work with people who may not agree with us, being willing to work with people who may not even be in the same party with us, if that's possible, and arriving at solutions that protect the interests that we share and agreeing to disagree on topics that we may not.
Thank you. Katie?
Our job in the Minnesota legislature is to get things done, to serve you. And as an engineer, problem solving is what I do. In my day job, I work on policy, analyzing data, but then actually working with stakeholders. So I'll give one example, most recently with energy code. So for 4 years, stakeholders have been working to advance commercial energy code, to make our buildings more energy efficient when we're building new construction. And there were factions that wanted to have 100%, get there 100% with clean energy. And there were others that were concerned about the technologies able to get there. And the folks were divided. And so I did some research, and I found an example from Washington State that would apply, and in a timeline that stakeholders could get on board with. Because the other thing about setting policy is making sure that it's implementable. So it's not just writing words on a paper, but it's thinking through what resources are going to be needed to actually make the policy real. It might be funding, it might be FTEs, it might be technology, it might be hiring an outside company to help with it. And so throughout those processes, at the end of the day, we found an 80% more efficient goalpost. We found a timeline that will work for folks, and it's now been passed at the legislature, and that's how it'll continue to govern.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question before our closing statements. How do you plan to listen to, communicate with, and tap into the wisdom of all of your constituents, including those who cannot vote? What are your plans for leveraging social media? It's kind of a two-parter. First up, we'll have Will.
So the best part of running for office has been talking to all of y'all. Without a doubt, we've knocked something like 12,000 doors, and I've learned so much from this community. And so my commitment to you is if I'm elected, I'll keep it up. I'll keep knocking doors, I'll keep calling you up. I already know so many of your names, and I want to learn everybody's name. Might be tough with 40,000 people, but I'm gonna give it a shot. And I really don't think there's any substitute for these face-to-face conversations. And I'm going to say that this was not something I expected when I ran for office. I thought this would be exhausting, but it's been great. So I really think that those personal conversations with voters, where people are honest about what they feel and what they care about and what their problems are, there's just really no other way to do it.
Thank you. Katie.
So we're running for a seat for the House of Representatives. So we're here to represent you, and that means we must be in communication. I think communication through multiple means is a smart path. I don't know about you, but I don't really want to hear from the president every day. I don't necessarily want to hear directly from the governor every day. I trust them because I've elected them to serve on my behalf. So I want to make myself available when you want to be in conversation with me. So, via phone, via email, I'll door knock occasionally because I don't want to bother you in your day-to-day life. But I want to be available when you need me. Also, when it comes to social media, I think it's an important tool, and it's an important tool that we should be transparent about. It's one where we can talk about happenings in our community, policy ideas, initiatives that we're working on, what we're up to as electeds. But what we say on there has consequence, whether it's on our personal forums or in our public ones. Especially when we're in elected office, what we say holds more weight, and we have to take that responsibility very seriously. We should hold every member of the DFL to high standards when they do communication.
Thank you. Isabel.
Thank you for the question. So in my current job now, I'm staff to the House Majority Leader, and we're going on 2 years in a row in his office being #1 in constituent services, and I run that in his department. So I know how to reach out to folks. If I'm elected, I'm gonna make sure that I set up that same system for me and my staff to make sure you all hear from me in an incredibly timely manner. When we talk about the use of social media for outreach, that's great for a certain demographic, but it doesn't work for everybody. We have to make sure we're also engaging with folks via lit in their mailboxes in case they don't use social media, by still doing door knocks, and of course hosting coffees or happy hours or anything to get constituents to come out and enjoy their time to make it natural and ask questions. Because I want to stand by my slogan, which is fighter, advocate, and friend. I want to fight for you all, I want to advocate for you all, and I want to be your friends, because who has your back more than your friends? This is why I want to host many meet and greets in the district, so that people can come, get to know me, and then ask me the hard questions. It'll be a lot easier for us to have these conversations if we feel like we trust each other. And I want to build that trust with all of you. You can guarantee that I'm going to try very, very hard to make sure if you send me an email as a legislator that you get a response within a week, if not 2. And if it's 2 weeks, I'm really sorry. It must be during session and it's busy. But I will get back to all of you, I promise. And again, as we talk about social media, we do need to be really careful and cognizant about what we're posting. The DFL is a team. If one person says something on social media, it affects the entire party and our ability to govern. So we need to be responsible with social media, and we need to be active for our constituencies to build trust.
Thank you. Now it's time for closing statements. Candidates will have up to 1 minute for their closing statement. First up is Katie.
Yeah, I first would like to thank the League of Women Voters and for the Lodi Lutheran Church for hosting us, and with your expert forum hosting. It's been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you all for being here, and especially to all of you who submitted a question. It's from your questions that we learned what's important to you. And that's what elected officials need to hear. Because there's no job description for elected office. There's no criteria on LinkedIn or on Indeed. And so I take the cue from the name of this position, member of the House of Representatives. And that means standing up for representing the values of this district. As I've knocked on doors and talked with people, I've heard themes of our shared values, of building a more just, resilient, and thriving Minnesota. I'm excited to work together on building that Minnesota and I'm ready to hit the ground running on day 1. And I hope I can count on your support on the August 13th primary.
Thank you. Next, Isabel.
I want to echo the sentiments of Katie and say thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for hosting. This has been fantastic to hear what you all care about. I just want to leave a sentiment with all of you that our district is basically the most diverse that we have in the entire city. We have renters, we have homeowners, we have elderly folk, we have young folk, and of course we have people all over the political spectrum in our district. We need somebody that's in this race that's able to represent all of those people and understand them. I don't want to be somebody who aligns with one voting bloc or another, because that makes half of us feel like we're losing out in our representation. I promise, using my background from rural Minnesota, having a father who's a laborer, a mom who's a paraprofessional, to draw from all of these experiences from working class people to make sure that we're creating a district where we can uplift everyone. Our median income for our district and our mean are $50,000 apart, which means we see a lot of disparities. And I'm going to run in this seat to make sure that everyone has an equal chance of succeeding. I hope that I can have your support on August 13th, and I think you all are fantastic for being here.
Thank you. And Will.
Once again, thank you, everyone. As I've talked to all of you, many of you, I've heard a lot of different ideas about whether or not the district can get better or worse. And I firmly believe that the district, that the state, that the city can get better. I think that we can bring prosperity to Minneapolis again. I think we can fix our schools. I think we can make the city safe. I think that we can protect vulnerable people in Minnesota, regardless of what happens in the rest of the country. I've learned so much from all of you. Please keep talking. Please keep reaching out with the issues you care about, whether that's end-of-life options, or it's keeping the lakes clean, or helping Lyndale Avenue. Please keep reaching out so I can learn from you. Please vote August 13th. I ask for your support. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You do have to listen to me speak for a few more minutes. I promise I'll be fast. On behalf of all of the co-sponsors, I thank the candidates for being part of the democratic process by running for office and for being willing to serve our community. We hope this forum has helped voters to make an informed decision with regard to the August 13th, 2024 primary election. The Minneapolis League of Women Voters will be holding a candidate forum for the Minnesota House District 61A seat before the general election on November 5th. That forum will host a DFL winner of the primary and Green Party candidate, Toya Lopez. Stay tuned for the date and the time of that forum. There are also important U.S. partisan and Minneapolis nonpartisan races on the primary ballot. A sample ballot is available on the Minnesota Secretary of State website, mnvotes.gov, and we encourage you to review this so that you can make informed decisions when voting. You can also find nonpartisan information about candidates and about voting at another league website, vote411.org. Early voting for the primary began June 28th and will end on August 12th. The video recording of this forum will be available, unedited, for viewing on the League of Women Voters Minneapolis website, lwvmpls.org. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan or political purposes. And finally, please vote. Your vote is your voice and your power. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.